The Assassin's Creed series started all the way back in 2007. Since then, there have been several releases over the 15-year period, each being unique in their own way, but there being mixed messages with positive as well as negative reviews for all of them, and they were all different, with each game being a new idea from Ubisoft. But unfortunately, at some point within this series, the franchise started to fall apart, and that's exactly what we're exploring within this video. But for us to do that, we need to go all the way back to the beginning. The first installment in the Assassin's Creed series was released November 13th, 2007 for PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, with a PC release arriving a year later. The game was great. Many considered this a solid foundation for the future ahead. There isn't a single gameplay aspect of the first Assassin's Creed which stood the test of time. Ubisoft has improved in all possible aspects, but this was a very good start, and certainly was ahead for its time. There isn't an aspect of Assassin's Creed 1 which has stood the test of time, but it was still good. Many fans would even love to see a remake of Assassin's Creed 1, as it really did do a perfect job of setting the ground for the road ahead. And of course, because it did kick off the franchise, there's no way that this is the downfall. Assassin's Creed 2 was released 1 year later in 2008, on the same platforms being PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 and PC. This game brought something, or well, someone very special to the table. This was Ezio. Ezio to this day is the #1 assassin to most hardcore fans. AC2 was the beginning of Ezio's fantastic trilogy. What really made this game stand out was the protagonist and his journey from a troublemaker to a famed master assassin. Ubisoft knew that they had something good because whilst this was in development, they was also working on a follow-up, this being Brotherhood, which also included Ezio. And this was also the start of Ubisoft pushing yearly releases, which also opens up a few problems later down the line, which we will talk about. But with Brotherhood, this was released in 2009, and continued with the Ezio story. Everything that was good with Assassin's Creed 1 and Assassin's Creed 2 was improved upon within Brotherhood. And overall, even though there were some problems, as you would expect with any game, fans to this day would still put Brotherhood at the top of their list. After Brotherhood, we had Revelations, yet again following the story of Ezio, but at this point, it was starting to drag out a bit. Revelations hasn't got as good reviews compared to Assassin's Creed 2 and Brotherhood, but it was still good. It wrapped up the Ezio story and also linked back to the very first Assassin's Creed, so it also brought in Altair. But the biggest point was that Revelations was the end of Ezio's story, so what were they going to do with the following Assassin's Creed? And could this be the downfall with them bringing in a new character? And that's exactly what players started to think with Assassin's Creed 3. Assassin's Creed 3 certainly allowed Ubisoft to make some changes. There were massive gameplay improvements with the ability of not just being able to parkour buildings, but also being able to maneuver through the environment, climbing trees as well as cliffs. There was also the introduction with some missions allowing you to sell your own ship, and this definitely opened the door for the following games, which we will talk about in a second. Overall, it was an immersive city, but many players didn't like the main character being Connor. The game was also slow paced, with the first 3 sequences being tutorials as you was controlling Haytham. And by the time those sequences were over, because Connor had a different skill set and abilities, you then had to go through another lot of additional tutorials just so that you know how to control Connor. The pacing was completely off, and it did lead to some mixed reviews, and it was at this point that fans really started to believe that the franchise was going to collapse, but it didn't. Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag was then released, and this really brought faith back into the franchise. You would play as Edward Kenway, which was the grandfather of Connor, so there's still a family link. But this time, you was a pirate. You was able to sail the open seas with your very own boat and crew, and the gameplay for this was so good that now players rank this as one of the top titles within the franchise. But not just that, it inspired other developers within Ubisoft to create a spin-off using their very own Assassin's Creed pirate gameplay mechanics. Of course, this is Skull and Bones and it hasn't ended well. In fact, to this date, it still isn't pushed public, but when it was first announced within 2017, fans were hyped. They loved the idea of a standalone with just pirate gameplay and nothing to do with Assassin's Creed, just you being a pirate. And this just goes to show how much players love Black Flag. Not just that, But Rogue was the next Assassin's Creed title which also used elements from Assassin's Creed Black Flag. Unfortunately, Rogue had the poor timing. On its release, at the exact same time, PlayStation 4 and Xbox One was also being pushed public. But Ubisoft knew that it was early days for next-gen consoles, and the majority of their fan base was still on previous gen, so they had to push Assassin's Creed Rogue with a limited budget and limited resources back on previous gen consoles. But despite this, because they were taking assets from Assassin's Creed Black Flag that fans loved and enjoyed, it wasn't a problem. It was still rated very highly. But that brings us to Unity. Remember earlier where I said that there was starting to be a few cracks with them pushing yearly releases? Well, this really started to show with Assassin's Creed Unity. On its release, there was more problems than any other title. There were so many bugs, so many glitches that most that tried to play after completing a sequence or two couldn't play anymore. The game wouldn't allow it. It would crash and prevent anyone from going any further. This lasted for weeks and even months. Eventually, Ubisoft got round to fix it, but at that point, it was just way too late. Players weren't interested in playing a game which they were excited to play at first, but unfortunately had so many problems. At that point, by the time when it was finally fixed, there was other games that they wanted to play, so they just went on to play them. This certainly didn't help with the following release with Assassin's Creed Syndicate had the exact same problems. Now I do want to take the time to highlight that with any type of game as well as any type of development in general, when something is pushed to the public for the first time, there's always going to be issues. But with both Unity and Syndicate, there was a lot more than what there really should be, mainly because it became impossible for players to play. But with Syndicate, there was also the additional problem that there were certain elements which felt rushed. Being able to control a wagon just didn't feel right. It wasn't smooth. It was very clunky. And they also had their very own problems where players would just try to avoid using them, but they couldn't because they were essential for certain missions. And that's when Ubisoft finally highlighted the issue, which most people already knew. They could not push yearly releases. It led to developers needing to rush through their work, so there was just no more quality within the franchise, and on top of that, they had to go through crunch time just so that they can meet deadlines, and it just wasn't healthy. This became such a massive issue that after Syndicate, Ubisoft announced that they were no longer going to push yearly releases. Instead, they're going to take some time off. This was a problem, but it wasn't the end of the series. After a few years, in 2017, Ubisoft announced Origins, and this was really when things started to change. Up until this point, Assassin's Creed was an open world narrative-driven game, but would be changing to a massive open world RPG. And with Origins, it would be set within Egypt. Now, I want to start off by saying that Assassin's Creed Origins is well received. It's highly rated as a game, but for a lot of the long-time Assassin's Creed fans, they don't see it as Assassin's Creed. Going from an open world narrative-driven game to a massive open world RPG are two completely different things. And this did two things. Firstly, it alienated the existing Assassin's Creed fans, but the second thing that it did was open up to a brand new audience. This brought in more players than any other title, and because this was an RPG element, Ubisoft also brought in microtransactions, which led to there being even more money for them. And of course, from a business standpoint, they're going to double down on this, and that's exactly what they did with Odyssey. Odyssey was released just 1 year later in 2018, and of course, Ubisoft doubled down on those RPG elements. This further alienated the existing Assassin's Creed fans. Of course, they fell in love with this franchise, bought every single title from the very beginning. They were still going to try this out, and the second that they did, they realized that they didn't like it. Stealth was no longer as much of a priority, neither was parkour because the world was just so open. Of course, parkour was still there, but this was when Ubisoft were taking out parkour animations because they were no longer needed. Everything that they were building up to over the years was slowly starting to be pulled away. Many even wondered why the name even included Assassin's Creed, because this wasn't Assassin's Creed. They could have taken the exact same gameplay, called it something completely different, and it probably would have still been a very good game. Just remove all Assassin's Creed elements. But of course, everyone knew If that was to happen, Ubisoft wouldn't get as many sales. With the new type of players that were coming in from Origins as well as Odyssey, they loved this style. They wanted to see more of it. But this did create a split within the community. When you see negative reviews on this title, it's mainly from those that have been part of the series since the very beginning, and they've seen it evolve into something that they're not happy with. Whereas newer fans are more likely to be positive about this because they enjoy the new style, whereas they hated the original. And of course, with this, yet again, Ubisoft doubled down. In 2020, they released Assassin's Creed Valhalla, this yet again being RPG open world, this time set within the Viking era. You play as Eivor, who is able to explore England, but this time the world was bigger than ever. If you wanted to complete the story, it's going to take anywhere between 40 to 70 hours depending what you're doing, with there being additional side activities that you can go into. And once you've completed this, there's also 4 separate DLCs that you can finish, each being 10 to 20 hours in length. And this is where everyone admits there's a problem. Valhalla is just way too big. There are a small percentage of fans that say, no, it's great because it means that the hardcore fans can play, but from a financial standpoint as well as a gamer standpoint, it's not good having a long game. Valhalla has about a 15 to 20% retention rate, which means the majority of players that bought the title never completed it. They didn't even get a quarter of the way through. So this meant players didn't actually experience what this game had to offer, and developers spent all this time working on another 80% of the game only for no one to ever see it. That's a lot of money and a lot of time wasted when they could have done something completely different. At this point, if you were to talk to an existing Assassin's Creed fan that has been there since the very beginning, they'll say that this series completely died out with Origins, Odyssey and Valhalla. Whereas if you talk to a newer player, they said that this series came alive because of Origins, Odyssey and Valhalla. So that brings us to this point of the video, the downfall. What is it? And the truth is, there really isn't one. Yes, the series took some changes, and yes, it took some changes in a direction that I'm not happy with. I am one of those players which would prefer the older games, but I'm also able to take a step back and look. Ubisoft has had more players with Origins, Odyssey and Valhalla than ever before. They've also been able to generate a lot more money compared to previous titles. There is a problem with retention, especially with Valhalla, and that's why they're going back to the original roots with Mirage, but they're also looking to explore other options with different types of styles of games with the following titles after it. The issue that Ubisoft have created for themselves, and it's also something which is interesting to see, is that they made changes. They made changes with every Assassin's Creed title that was released. Some of them good, some of them not so good. But with every single change that they made, it created a split. A split within the community where someone would like something, but someone else wouldn't. And the biggest change they made was with Origins, making it an RPG type of game. This alienated older fans, but also opened the door to newer fans. Now there's different groups of people that like different things under the exact same umbrella of Assassin's Creed. The way in which Ubisoft are trying to handle this problem by managing different types of players and trying to make everyone happy is with Assassin's Creed Infinity. Assassin's Creed Infinity is not a game. In fact, it's going to be a hub which holds several games, as well as there being free content that players will be able to play through. There's already been announcements for several titles that will include this, but it's still years away. Now, with Assassin's Creed Infinity, we have already done a video here on this channel. So if you do want to know everything about how Ubisoft is trying to solve this exact problem with the Assassin's Creed franchise, then make sure that you do click that video which is now on screen, and I'll be over there with you to guide you through everything.